Hi, Jackie here. I'm the Manager of Therapeutic Programming for AFA, and it's my pleasure to introduce Alix Sugarman, licensed creative arts therapist and board certified art therapist. In today's virtual community class, we'll be creating artist cards. So grab your supplies and let's create some art.
Hi, my name is Alix Sugarman, and I'm super excited to be here today and to introduce hopefully a really fun, really nice way to get creative during this time when many of us are at home and maybe engaging a little bit less in our day-to-day routines. So I'm excited to introduce something called artist trading cards. I don't know if maybe you've heard of them before, but I'm going to talk about what they are and how we could make some today and a really cool, fun kind of history about them. So I'm excited to share that with you. And then I also wanted to talk with you about what kind of space you're making at home to create artwork. And so I thought in this day and age when we are transitioning into life with COVID-19 and social distancing, I've been making a recommendation to people that I work with, to friends, to family, to maybe carve out a special space in your home that you can be creative. I think that in order to tap into our creative resources and our creative energy, one of the most powerful and profound ways to do that is to be sure that we have a really sacred, really intentional space for that. And I know that that can be hard to do with limited resources, and some of us might be in small spaces. Some of us might be in any kind of a situation where we don't have a lot of our own personal space. And so I thought that we could talk about this today in a way that would maybe make it more accessible, no matter what location you're in, to create kind of a nice, calm, intentional, safe space for creating. So if you're watching this, you might look around and decide, there's a place by the window where I could pull up a chair. Maybe there's a nice part of my kitchen table that I could return to every day. Maybe there's a desk in my bedroom that I could clear off. But it might be a fun little project to find yourself in a really intentional place in your home. It just feels good to create. So for me, that's always by a window to look outside, which is really great. And I brought a couple of things with me just to feel comfortable, to feel excited, and to feel a little bit nurtured in my creative process today. So I brought just one of my favorite little crystal rocks. It's nice to touch. I like the way that it feels. It's really cold. It has some really flat surfaces that are sort of interesting to run my fingers over. And some people believe that crystals have some really profound powers in them. And so sometimes holding it feels really nice. I also like to just bring a candle with me. That's a really nice way for me to separate my space into a creative space. And I thought I would make that invitation today for you to create the same at home. It's going to look different for each of us, and maybe you have some ideas about making that right for you. Maybe you'd like to bring a comforting pillow or a nice blanket. Maybe you have a pet that would join you in some art making. That might be nice. It would be really fun to hear maybe in the comment section if there are any fun things that you like to invite into a creative space like that. Before we get started, I thought I could introduce this concept that I was talking about before about artist trading cards. You may have heard them referenced before. You may have heard those words, and we will just kind of talk about them a little bit. So artist trading cards, ATCs, are miniature pieces of art that are traded around the world. Artists create, trade, and collect art at organized swap events, either in person or online. The only official rule for ATCs is the size, 2.5 inches by 3.5 inches. How did the movement start? In 1997, M. Vancy Stiernemann, a Swiss artist, created 1,200 cards by hand as part of an exhibit. On the last day, he invited others to create their own cards and trade with him during the closing reception. The movement took off, and today there are ATC swaps in almost every major city around the world. There are also many online swaps. So there are so many reasons why I wanted to introduce this to you today, and excited to go into a little bit more detail about that. I'm going to share a little bit more about how we create them. Most swaps are open to any media, materials, or techniques as long as the card fits into a standard trading card sleeve. ATCs are traded, not sold. However, there are some artists who choose to sell cards. Cards that are sold are called art card editions and originals. And in the website that I looked up that taught me more about these, they use letters to represent these things. So they use acronyms. They say ACEO, art card editions and originals. So if you are at home and you're interested in Googling this, you might Google artist cards or artist card editions, and you might see that referenced a few different times. How do I trade cards? You can locate an in-person swap in your area, find an online swap, or organize your own swap. There are a number of websites that others have created to help artists get started. They can be found by doing online searches using keywords such as artist trading cards. We are going to play around with this concept a little bit and actually make an artist trading card today. You know, our schedules have really changed since COVID-19. We might be spending more time at home. We might be spending the same amount of time at home. We might be seeing less familiar faces. We might be feeling disconnected given everything that's going on. And I think I just want to invite you to feel and recognize how you're doing today with that. It's a big change and it's a lot to manage. And maybe for today, you could just give yourself some permission to feel however you're feeling. I know that taking a big deep breath for me and reminding myself to take that big deep breath has been a really helpful way to check in with how I'm feeling. So I really loved this project because I thought we need more authentic ways to be connected to each other, whether we're at home or we are connecting through online platforms like this, or we are, with just a few people at home. The great thing is you could do this with one other person. You could do this with a family member. You could mail these anywhere. I'm thinking that there might be really great resources just with a quick Google search to figure out if you'd want to collect other artist cards. I also really love this project because I think it's really fun and important to work on small goal-oriented projects. So when we're talking about a card that's very little, it's a really small surface area. It gives us a really contained, really small framework within which we can work. And we might just feel satisfied just with attempting this new process together today. If it's something that you try out today and you get excited about, you could have a goal to create one card per day. And that might feel really helpful just to get your creative juices flowing, just to check in with the artist inside of you and say, oh, you know what? I can make art. I can do this one day at a time. And so I thought this would be a really great project for right now. I also thought it could be really helpful to work within a medium that feels a little bit more concrete than paper. Instead of working on traditional printer paper or lightweight paper, it feels really nice to kind of pick up and hold a sturdy piece of cardboard. And so I'm going to go through your art materials now, but the first of these materials would be to grab maybe a cereal box or from food storage, pasta or crackers or cereal, and empty that box out or take one from your recycling. And you're going to have a really thick, kind of sturdy piece of cardboard here that's going to hopefully feel nice to hold and feel a little bit substantial right now. You're going to need your cardboard. Have with me a clipboard with some white paper underneath it. I might use this if I need to experiment with my art materials or if I just need a clear surface to work on. But I wanted to share that too because this is something else that feels a little bit sturdier right now. And things in the world aren't feeling super sturdy. I think we have a lot of uncertainty that we're managing. And so working with some materials that feel a little more solid and a little more substantial is a really nice way to remind ourselves that we can stay grounded in this moment. So I have my cardboard, I have my white paper, I have some watercolor right here. You might have noticed this before. So this is a special kind of watercolor set that actually has little square blocks of paint. So I'm going to put them right back in. I really like this set. It's a really high quality artist set, but you can get a really inexpensive watercolor set on Amazon, or you can get brushes on Amazon that are so affordable and are really nice to play around with at home. This is called Winsor & Newton, and what I like about this is that it comes with a brush that has some water inside it that allows you to add as little or as much water on top of these kind of cubes of paint that you see. So that's appealing to me. I like that. I have a pen here. I have a pencil, which I left over here. I have a playing card. So I think a playing card is actually a tiny bit smaller than the recommended size. I think it's 0.05 inches smaller than the recommended size, but I think that it is still completely approved as long as it fits inside a trading card sleeve. And so I thought this would be a good starting place for kind of identifying and recognizing a playing card. Or rather a template for your artist trading card. And I like the pattern on these playing cards. Kind of inspiring, actually. It's a nice geometric shape. I also have some pastels. I just brought 2 pastels because I had an idea for what kind of card I wanted to make today. I brought a white pastel and a blue pastel. And these pastels are not water soluble, but you might be interested in working with watercolor in a different format. And I wanted to tell you about one of my favorite materials, and that's water soluble oil pastel. So that's a pastel that looks just like this, but if you use a glass of water, or you have some water with you, you can dip the pastel right into the water, and it will kind of melt into a paint consistency. And I always have a lot of fun with that. It's cool because you have a more controlled material that you can work with, or a looser, more fluid material, depending on how much water you add. And that's really, really cool. So I'm going to take this artist card, playing card, and I'm going to move into step 1 of the project. I also wanted to mention, right over here is my scissor. So I'm taking my artist card, my first playing card. I'm going to put it down here. What I'm going to do is hold it down and trace it. I really liked starting the project off this way because often tracing as well kind of gets us to put our hands right down on the paper and to just ground ourselves, to just pause for a moment and feel a little more grounded in our art making process. I wanted to trace right around in my cardboard, but depending on the size of the piece of cardboard you have or the amount of material you have, it might be helpful to plan out, okay, in this one piece, I could fit 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 whole cards. I have plenty of cardboard, and I'm gonna sample just 1 card today. So I'm gonna take my scissor here and I'm gonna cut. So you might be at home or you might be with a caregiver. The cool thing is, this could take pretty minimal preparation, but if you cut out maybe 10 and left them in your art making space, you could have a really fun goal to just make 1 each day and see where that leads. What I loved about this idea as well is I thought, what if there were really nice ways that you could connect with somebody in your neighborhood, or if you're in an apartment building, someone in your apartment building, you could leave these as gifts to people. You could mail them, which would be a really fun way to just, again, feel more connected right now in this time where we are socially distant. So something that's cool about this is that we could get really creative and do any sort of artwork right onto here. Just play around with watercolors and see what that looks like. Or we can have more of a structured idea of what we wanted our deck to be about. And so today I thought we have an idea in just picking specific art materials, but I thought I could invite you also to consider some of these themes Maybe if you are a fan of animals, you'd want to do a deck that's a different animal every day. If you really love recipes, you might want to collect your favorite recipes or an image that inspires a recipe. It could be weather patterns, it could be any sort of collection that would be fun or inspiring to you. I invite you to pick from these or to imagine a collection if it were. So if there was one thing you could return to every day. If you're a pet owner and you really like cats or dogs, you could do a whole series on your favorite animal. And if you do not have a lot of experience with art making, you might be interested in using different materials like collage to represent these things, or really any material you want to cover this. Today, as we know, I'm just doing one card. But my idea for my own deck was going to be to create a series about self-care, about caring for yourself right now. I think that we are each building a relationship to caring for ourselves right now. Or if we're working with a caregiver, they are helping us stay on track with what we do each day to care for ourselves. So this might be something fun to engage again with somebody in your home, engage with another party in your home. Thought, wow, what if I created a different card for each different self-care behavior or ritual that I do each day? And one of the things that I keep forgetting to do at home, and I don't know if it's stress or what, but I have not been drinking enough water. And I always have a big water bottle right next to me. I like to keep that in my artist space as well. But I have often forgotten to drink water. And so I am going to create one of a series of cards that is going to remind me of water. So the first thing I thought I'd do is to take this oil pastel. The oil here is going to have a really interesting relationship to watercolor. Oil and water, as we know, don't mix. And so we create something with an oil pastel and we add water. That might have an interesting effect. I also picked oil pastels to work with because I know that I have some writing on the other side of my card. I actually really like how this came out. It's just the packaging that's really multicolored, but it kind of looks cool. But if you're looking for a material that's going to really stick to a shiny surface like this, your oil pastels are going to be really great for that. So I'm just coloring over this text. Your hands kind of get a little messy if you use oil pastel, and that's okay. Part of the process of setting up a creative space is about cleaning it up too, and transitioning into and out of that space in a way that feels good for you. So we know we can roll up our sleeves and get a little bit messy with art. So I showed you the before of kind of having all that text and that labeling. And it's kind of interesting how it's really opaque. You can't see any of the words that were once on there. Okay. And I'm going to add some blue here. I like working with oil pastels because they do get messy, but they're really fun to mix with your fingers. You could do that with your fingers, or you might choose to do that with a tissue or a brush. So I chose a symbol to represent water. I chose a droplet. So that might be one way to remind you of how to structure, remind you of how to structure a deck. So maybe if you are trying to represent different cats, but you don't have a strong background in illustration, or that might be difficult to do, you might think of different symbols to represent them. You might think of like a paw print with a certain pattern on it, or any sort of symbolic representation. So a symbol today was a really helpful way for me to simplify a drawing. I didn't get too caught up in, do I represent a glass of water? Am I going to draw a picture of myself drinking it? I just knew that I wanted it to be really simple. And that might be fun. So I took my paintbrush here and I squeezed it a little bit because I was telling you about this funny brush. The water pools up in these little cubes that you saw before when I dropped them. And if I add more water, the paint is going to have a more transparent quality. And if I add less water, it's going to have a more thick quality. So I am adding some blue, and there are two blue colors in this palette. I think it's interesting to mix different colors. One thing I like doing with watercolor is to add a little bit of water right onto the page to spread the paint out. You don't want to add too much water. Soak the page, but just enough so that the paint can kind of move around a little bit on its own. So I colored inside and outside of my little water droplet. What happens when you combine oil pastels and watercolor is that the water moves away from the oil pastel a little bit and it kind of shines through. Now that I added a bunch of water, I want to actually add some more color and some more paint. And one thing that I'm noticing in my process is that the more water I add, that the cardboard is actually bowing a little bit. It's bending a little bit with water on top of it. So that's something that's helpful for me to know as I add to my deck later. I know now that I'm working with this that I might want to be aware of the water that I use, or might affect my process, that I might want it to dry a little bit as I add different layers of watercolor. Interesting, there are two different colors of blue here. There's a really subtle difference in the shade of the blue. I thought they would look a lot different on paper, but when I added water, they blend together in an interesting way. One thing I did not plan for was that I probably want all of my cards to look very similar on one side, so that if I were going to pull from them and I didn't want to know exactly what the other side said, I could have some clarity around that. So if, let's say, you saw me use this blue oil pastel, I would maybe want to create, with this set, I think what I'd like to do is create a whole set of 10 cards, and all 10 of those cards have one side that are blue oil pastel. And the other side would be a self-care item. And then for me, I'd like to pick one, maybe each day, each morning, to find one thing that I could do for myself that would feel good. Drinking water is always a really great break. Just a great way to check in with my body, see how I'm feeling, and have a little pause in the day. So as I continue these self-care cards, I guess I could always add to that first layer of blue. I'll just show you that pastel. It's not completely opaque. So I might have some fun with that as I create more. It's thick and it's a little bit tacky, I would say the texture is. So I might actually decide to cover this in packing tape. If you have any packing tape at home, that's a really nice way to make kind of a laminated surface. And that would help me protect the cards so that I could play with them on my own and be sure that they weren't getting any oil pastel anywhere. So here is my artist card. This is just my representation of water. It's a drop of water to remind myself to drink some water every day. One thing that I love to do when I create artwork is to examine a little bit of what's left in my process. And so it was nice for me to work on this blank paper. And then I have a funny little painting that kind of arrived here by accident, and I might decide to add a little more to that later. Even from this interesting window that came out of this. So that's a fun thing too about really creating an intentional space for art. If you can kind of get lost in your project, you can kind of look up when all is said and done and find some really fun, interesting pieces of your process that can help you move into a next step. So that's a fun added bonus that I always like to get excited about. All right, well, I have some more of these. I am looking forward to hearing some feedback about this video, and I'm so grateful that you were here to make art with me today. I hope this maybe inspired you to have a glass of water, do something to take care of yourself today, or create an intentional space for art making.